The alarm began as a low hum beneath the palace floor, a sound so old that only the queen recognized it for what it truly meant. It was not a warning meant to calm. It was a warning meant to accept the end. Queen Arelis rose slowly from her throne as the sound deepened and spread through the vast hall. The walls of living crystal glowed with a troubled light, shifting from calm blue to harsh red. Outside the tall windows, the sky above the capital burned. Ships fell like broken stars and distant explosions shook the air. This was not how it was supposed to end. For centuries, the Queen's people had believed their world untouchable. Their fleets were strong. Their alliances were many. Their royal guard was trained from birth to protect the throne above all else. Fear was something spoken of in old stories, not something felt inside the palace. Yet now fear moved freely through the halls. The great doors of the throne chamber burst open as guards rushed inside. Their armor was scorched, their crests broken. Some were injured, some were shaking. None met the queen's eyes. "The outer defenses have fallen," one of them said quickly. "The enemy has breached the inner city. We must evacuate you at once." Queen Arelis looked past him, watching more guards run through the corridor behind. None were moving toward the front lines. All were moving away. "Where is the High Commander?" she asked. No one answered. The silence told her everything. Another explosion struck nearby. The floor trembled and shards of crystal fell like rain. The guards flinched. "We still have a path open," the same guard insisted. "A ship is waiting, please, Your Majesty." The queen stepped down from her throne. Her long robe brushed the cracked floor as she walked forward. She studied the faces of those sworn to die for her. She saw desperation, calculation, and something she had never expected to see in them. The will to survive at any cost. "You may go," she said calmly. The guards froze. "Your Majesty, you may leave," she repeated. "I will not flee my people." For a moment no one moved. Then another blast shook the palace, closer this time. The guards looked at each other. One by one they lowered their weapons. Some bowed quickly, some did not. Then they turned and ran. Within moments the throne chamber was empty. Queen Arelis stood alone in the center of the vast hall. The alarms continued their endless call. Dust drifted through the air. The great doors remained open, showing the dark corridor beyond. She felt no anger. Only a deep, quiet understanding. This was the truth beneath loyalty when fear became absolute. She returned to her throne and sat down. If this was the end, she would meet it as a queen. Footsteps echoed in the distance. She did not look up at first. She assumed it was an enemy coming to claim victory. When the steps stopped, she raised her eyes. A single figure stood at the far end of the hall. He was not one of her people. The armor he wore was dull and practical, marked with scratches and burns. His helmet was tucked under one arm, revealing a human face streaked with dirt and dried blood. He looked exhausted. His shoulders sagged with the weight of battle, yet his eyes were clear and focused. A human soldier. Queen Arelis searched her memory. Humans were allies, yes, but not rulers, not guardians of alien thrones. This one must have been part of the diplomatic security detail, stationed far from real danger. "You should leave," she said, her voice echoing through the chamber. "This place will fall." The human looked around the empty hall. He saw the broken floor, the abandoned weapons, the open doors. Understanding crossed his face. "They all ran," he said quietly. "Yes." He took a few steps forward. His boots echoed loudly in the silence. "Then I guess that makes this simple," he said. He stopped several paces from the throne and placed his helmet on the floor. He raised his weapon, checked it quickly, then faced the entrance. Queen Arelis frowned. "Human, this is not your duty." He glanced back at her. "With respect, Your Majesty, duty isn't always written down." Outside the chamber, distant voices echoed. Alien voices mixed with harsh, unfamiliar sounds. The enemy was close. "You will die," the queen said. The human nodded once. "Probably." She studied him carefully now. Humans were smaller than her kind, physically weaker by most measures, short-lived, emotional. Their value lay in adaptability, not endurance. Everything about him suggested he should be afraid, yet he stood there alone, unmoving. "Why?" she asked. He thought for a moment. "Because someone stayed," he said, "so I will too." The first enemy soldiers appeared at the far end of the corridor. Tall, armored shapes moved with confidence, weapons raised. They had expected no resistance. The human moved forward. The first shots echoed through the throne chamber. Energy bolts slammed into pillars and walls. The human fired back with precise, controlled bursts. He did not charge. He did not retreat. He used cover, angles, timing. Two enemy soldiers fell before the others even realized what they were facing. The queen watched in silence. More enemies poured into the corridor. The human adjusted his position, using fallen debris to slow their advance. He fired, moved, fired again. His breathing was steady. His movements were efficient. An explosion threw him against a pillar. He hit the ground hard and did not rise at once. Queen Arely stood up without thinking. Before she could speak, the human pushed himself back to his feet. Blood ran from a cut above his eye. He wiped it away and took aim again. "Stay behind the throne," he called to her without turning. "It's thicker," she obeyed. The enemy hesitated now. They had expected a broken palace and a captured queen. Instead, they faced a single human who refused to fall. Shots rang out again, the air filled with smoke and light. The throne chamber, once a symbol of peace and order, became a place of chaos. The human's weapon clicked empty. For a brief moment, silence returned. The queen held her breath. The human drew a smaller sidearm and continued firing as he moved backward, never turning his back on the enemy. His arm shook with exhaustion, but his aim remained true. A heavy blast struck near him. He was thrown to the ground again, this time landing close to the throne. Queen Arely stepped forward, standing beside him. "You must leave," she said urgently. "Now." He looked up at her and managed a tired smile. "Not yet." He pushed himself up, positioning his body slightly in front of hers. The enemy advanced cautiously now, slower than before. Somewhere deep within the palace, a signal began to spread. Loyal units that had scattered heard reports that made no sense. The queen was still alive. A human was holding the throne. For the first time since the attack began, something other than fear moved through the capital. Hope. The queen watched the human soldier stand alone against the coming darkness and understood something she never had before. Empires were not protected by walls or fleets. They were protected by those willing to stand when everyone else ran. And this human had chosen to stand. The smoke inside the throne chamber grew thick, turning the glowing crystal walls dull and gray. Broken pillars lay scattered across the floor, and the once smooth surface was scarred by burns and cracks. The sound of distant fighting echoed through the palace, but inside the chamber, time felt slow and heavy. The human soldier stood with his back slightly bent, his breathing rough. His armor was damaged in several places, and one leg dragged just a little when he moved. Still, he kept himself between the queen and the enemy. His weapon shook in his hands, not from fear, but from exhaustion. Queen Arely watched him closely. She had ruled for many cycles and seen many warriors, but never one like this. He did not shout or boast. He did not seek praise. He simply stood, again and again, as if the idea of leaving had never crossed his mind. The enemy forces paused at the entrance of the hall. They spoke among themselves in sharp, clicking sounds. They had lost more soldiers than expected. Their commander stepped forward, taller than the rest, his armor marked with symbols of rank. He looked past the human and focused on the queen. "Your guard has abandoned you," the commander said loudly. "Surrender. This human cannot save you." The human shifted his stance, placing one foot forward. "She's not surrendering," he said calmly. The commander laughed. "You are alone." The human nodded. "Yeah." The enemy attacked again. Energy fire filled the chamber. The human moved with practiced skill, firing short bursts, falling back step by step. He used the broken throne steps, the fallen pillars, anything that could slow the advance. Each movement was careful, measured. He wasted nothing. A bolt struck his shoulder. He grunted but stayed upright. Another hit the floor near his feet, throwing sparks into the air. Queen Arelis felt something tighten inside her chest. She was trained to accept death. She was not trained to watch someone else face it for her. Between waves of fire, the human dropped behind cover near the throne. He pressed a hand to his shoulder, then checked his weapon again. The counter flashed low. "You are injured," the queen said quietly. He glanced at her. "I've had worse days." She stepped closer. "You could still escape. The side corridors may not yet be sealed." He shook his head. "If I run, they rush the room. You won't make it." "You owe me nothing," she said. He met her gaze. His eyes were tired but steady. "Doesn't matter." The enemy advanced slowly now, careful, wary. They had learned that this human was dangerous, not because of strength but because of persistence. He did not break. He did not hesitate. The commander raised a hand, signaling a halt. "Human," the commander called out, "stand aside. You will be allowed to leave." The human did not answer at once. He checked his remaining ammunition. Very little. "No," he said simply. The commander's tone hardened. "You will die for an alien throne." The human shrugged. "Someone has to stand somewhere." The queen felt the weight of his words settle over her. Her own people had chosen survival. This human had chosen responsibility. The next attack was heavier. Explosions rocked the chamber, tearing apart the last intact columns. The human was thrown against the throne steps, landing hard. His weapon slid across the floor. Queen Arelis moved without thinking. She grabbed the weapon and pushed it back toward him. He looked surprised, then nodded in thanks as he pulled himself up. "You should not be here," he said softly. "This is not your fight." "It is my throne," she replied, "and you are fighting for it." She stood beside him now, not hiding, not retreating. She raised her chin and faced the enemy. The commander paused again, confused by the sight. The queen had not fled. She had not begged. She stood calmly beside a wounded human. The enemy hesitated, and that moment was enough. From deep within the palace, distant signals flared to life. Loyal units, scattered and disorganized, received confirmation that the queen still lived. And more than that, they heard how she lived. A human soldier stood with her. That idea spread faster than fear. Inside the throne chamber, the human fired his last rounds, each shot precise. When the weapon clicked empty, he did not panic. He drew his sidearm again, slower this time, pain visible in his movements. A heavy blast struck near him, throwing him to one knee. Queen Arelis reached out and steadied him. Her hand rested on his arm, firm and warm. "You have done enough," she said. He laughed weakly. "Not yet." The enemy rushed forward, sensing the end. The human raised his sidearm with shaking hands. Then new sounds cut through the chaos. Weapons fire from behind the enemy lines. Shouts in the queen's language. The sharp cry of command. The enemy soldiers turned in confusion as loyal guards and palace defenders stormed the corridor, fighting with renewed strength. Their eyes were filled not with fear but determination. They had seen what one human did alone. They would not do less together. The enemy commander stepped back, stunned. His forces were caught between two fronts. The sudden resistance broke their momentum. The human finally allowed himself to lean against the throne steps. His legs gave way and he slid down slowly. Queen Arelis knelt beside him. "You held," she said softly. He closed his eyes for a moment. "Told you." The battle continued around them, but the throne chamber was no longer lost. It was defended. As the enemy began to retreat, the queen looked down at the human soldier who had refused to leave her side. In that moment, she understood that this was not just an act of bravery. It was a promise. And humans, she realized, were a species that kept their promises, even when the cost was everything. The throne chamber no longer felt like a place waiting to die. Smoke still hung in the air and the floor was broken and blackened, but the sound had changed. Where once there was only enemy fire and alarms, now there were voices filled with purpose. Loyal guards moved through the chamber, securing positions, helping the wounded, pushing the enemy back step by step. Queen Areles remained kneeling beside the human soldier. He was conscious but barely. His breathing was slow and uneven, his eyes half open. Blood stained his armor, but his hand still rested near his weapon, as if even now he refused to fully let go. Medics rushed forward, their movements fast and practiced. They hesitated for a moment when they saw who lay before the queen, a human, an outsider. "He is under my protection," the queen said calmly. That was all she needed to say. The medics immediately began treating him. They worked carefully, adjusting to his different biology, sealing wounds, stabilizing him enough to move. As they lifted him onto a stretcher, his eyes opened again. "You safe?" he asked quietly. The queen placed a hand over his, gentle but firm. "Because of you." He nodded once, satisfied, and then lost consciousness. As he was carried away, the queen stood and turned to the chamber. The fighting was nearly over now. The remaining enemy forces were retreating, unwilling to die for a battle already lost. Loyal units filled the hall, their armor marked by damage, their faces marked by shame and resolve. They knelt, not because of tradition, because they had seen the truth. Later, when the palace was secured and the wounded were treated, Queen Areles stood before her people. The throne chamber was damaged, but it still stood. Light from the crystal walls slowly returned, soft and steady. "The enemy believed we were broken," she said, her voice clear and strong. "They believed fear would end us." She paused, letting her gaze move across the gathered guards and officials. They were wrong. Images of the battle were already spreading across the capital and beyond. Recordings showed a single human soldier standing before the throne while trained guards fled. They showed him wounded, exhausted, refusing to move. They showed the queen standing beside him when escape was still possible. Across the empire the story spread, not of weakness, but of courage. Hours later, in a medical wing deep within the palace, the human soldier awoke. The room was quiet, filled with soft light and unfamiliar machines. His body felt heavy, pain dull but present. He tried to move and failed. "Do not," a calm voice said. He turned his head slowly and saw Queen Areles seated beside his bed. He blinked. "Guess I didn't die." She allowed herself a small smile. "You disappointed many who expected otherwise." He breathed out a weak laugh. "Story of my life." They sat in silence for a moment. "You could have left," the queen said finally. "Many would have." He stared at the ceiling. "Yeah. But then I'd have to live with it." She studied him. "Why does your kind do this? Stand when logic says run." He thought for a long time before answering. "Because if everyone runs, then nothing worth protecting survives." The queen nodded slowly. She understood now. In the days that followed, the empire began to change. The guards who fled were not executed, but they were removed from positions of honor. New training doctrines were written. New values were taught. Human instructors were invited. Alliances shifted. Other species took notice. They had believed humans dangerous because of their weapons, their ships, their adaptability. They were wrong. Humans were dangerous because of their choices. When the human soldier was strong enough to stand, he was summoned to the restored throne chamber. It was still scarred, but the cracks were left visible, a reminder. Queen Areles stood before him, not seated on the throne. "In the history of my people," she said, "no outsider has ever been named protector of the throne." The chamber was silent. She stepped forward and placed a symbol of office into his hands. It was old, worn, and heavy with meaning. "You stood when all others fled," she continued. "You did not protect a queen, you protected an idea." He looked down at the symbol, stunned. "I was just doing my job." She met his eyes. "No, you were being human." From that day forward, the story was told across the galaxy. Not as legend, not exaggerated, but exactly as it happened. An alien queen was left alone, and one human stayed, and the galaxy learned a simple truth it would never forget. When humans decide something is worth protecting, they will stand against the end of worlds to do it.